Um, yeah, let's touch on that. Okay, so you want to go with? Let's start with that then, since we already down that path. What'd you learn from Hefner? Did I say Hefner or Sterling?
No, you said Sterling.
Okay, all right. Okay, yeah, all right. So what'd you learn from Hefner? Paid ads work, and how is he delivering that?
How is he delivering his paid ads?
Yeah,
Mainly through Facebook.
through Facebook.
He's got ads at Target. Target sellers or buyers.
Right. Is he doing it through command or he's not? Whatever.
He's doing it through command. Yeah.
Is he? Oh, I didn't even tee that up. Okay. So what I'm hearing from you is command paid ads work. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. So this is the investor mastermind class. Does anyone here have aspirations to working with more investors? Is that a priority? You would? Anyone else? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're just talking about you. Welcome. By the way, did you guys know Josh is an Eagle Scout? I just learned this. It's a pretty big deal. So if you want to work with more investors, one of the things I recommend is you guys understand, like, do you guys ever get those emails where people are like, hey, I'd like to advertise your listing. Can I have permission? Do you get those emails? Realize you don't need permission, right? Permission already is granted through the IDX feeds. That's how Zillow and Realtor.com and all these other companies advertise their listings. You can advertise any listing you want. You just have to link it back to an IDX compliant site, which all of your command websites are that. Mr. Cosman, welcome, sir. Does that make sense? Okay, first and foremost. So your command websites are all IDX compliant. You can advertise any listing in the entire market. In fact, you can advertise any listing on there really anywhere, right? So realize that the command websites already allow for that. So if Frank takes an amazing listing and you want to co-op with Frank, you can advertise that. No different than Zillow advertises that. Okay, so just so everyone's clear on that. So if you want to generate more investor leads, what would be one way to do that now that you know that information? So if you take what Josh said about paid ads and you want to generate more investors, what would be one of these properties you would advertise? Could be multifamily, could be distressed, could be, I always say two things get the most amount of it's the prettiest and crappiest. I usually use a different word, but there's kids in the room. Right? Those are the two that typically get the most amount of inquiries. It's your absolutely beautiful turnkey, slam dunk, insta-worthy house that everybody aspires towards and people are sharing, right? And then there's the junk house that every investor under the sun calls you nonstop and your voicemail's full, right? So if you want to work with more investors, all you need to do is advertise the properties that other people have listed that are the junky ones. Does that make sense? You get a lot of call-ins, right? So if you advertise junky hunt, that's like a brick. That's not going to work. I saw a trash can, I would aim at it. So let's just say junky house. Right, that's an E in case anyone's wondering, and that's a U. I'm not here for my handwriting. So you got junky house, paid ads, right? So you get all these inquiries, right? Now you've got our average cost per lead when we were doing this consistently was about $2 a lead. Okay, so if you compare that to a bigger pockets lead, you can get like, 40 Facebook leads for one bigger pockets lead. So 40 Facebook versus one bigger pockets. Okay, so to me, the bigger pockets lead is going to be lower funnel and a little more captive audience because they're coming off a website where they're doing a lot of studying, right? Now, Facebook, you're going to get a lot more looky-loos, but anyone not on the Delia group, how would you filter through these looky-loos fast or were on the Delia group? How would you get through that? What would be a qualifying question you would ask quickly to figure out if they're a real investor or not? Or cash buyer, I think you'll still get a lot of kind of crap answers to that. You're not, shh.
You said or on the Delia group.
I said, or were.
Nobody answers.
Okay, she already said it. How many do you own? Right? How many do you own? And what happens from that question? 1 to a billion, right? That's how many they own. Or 0, right? And so you'll find out how much experience they had, like Trish said. And if it's 0, this is an aspiring investor, right? So they're an aspiring investor, or they're just a looky-loo local person. When the market slows down, you get a lot of seminars that come through, and that's when a lot of these phone calls start up, right? And so if they're a 0, now you know who you're dealing with, okay? And that doesn't mean that they're worthless or not worth the time. But now you know, okay, if there's too many red flags, I'm moving on with life. Over here, okay, I'm dealing with someone who's actually done something. Does that make sense? So you're able to filter through these 40 for the same cost as one bigger pockets lead, and you'll end up with more than one if you just put this simple practice into place. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the paid ads class. If you want to work with more investors, I promise you this will yield plenty of investors. And then you create the second problem, which is what?
I have one that he's all over the place. He does have own 85
Yep.
stores, I believe, but everything he asks me about, he is also working on pooling his money. So he's all over the board. Golf courses, party stores, multifamily. He wants to look at everything.
Yeah.
And I don't know. He'll turn it down.
Yeah, so he's essentially saying he wants something that's a deal, right? And that's really what the challenge is. You can work with all these investors, but deals are hard to come by currently, right? And a lot of the math that people are accepting in terms of deals today isn't the math that we all had 10 years ago, right? And so it's just a challenge. It's a challenge to find them those properties. Yeah. So that becomes the second challenge. I don't think obtaining investors is overly hard or overly expensive. Finding them the actual deal is where the challenge is today. And Fire Team was in here earlier. They actually finished the number 3 medium-sized team in the country, which was pretty cool. That Big Edible Arrangements out there is for them, which came in came like 2 hours too late. That could have been breakfast for them. But they managed to do it, right? They're going to do close to 500 of those this year. And they do a great job. I mean, Joe was a brand new agent with us in 2018, right? So if they would have had enough agents on the team, they would have been the number 1 transaction count, even large team. But since they're medium-sized team, so it is out there. What I heard those agents leaving this room crying saying was they have to it's a lot of lift to educate their clients because they work with a lot of first-time investors, right? And so yeah. Okay, what did we learn from Josh Sterling? Who was there for that? Max, what'd you learn? Yeah.
I learned a lot of the importance of models and systems with his property management company.
Okay.
Because at first it wasn't very successful because he didn't have very good models and systems in place. But
yeah.
He said once he put those in place and got it developed, they were profitable.
Yeah, I think models and systems, every day you're modeling off something, right? And you choose to follow different models for different aspects of your life. This idea that you don't need to follow a model for something means like somehow you're an innovator. You're the first ever. When in reality, there's best practices for just about everything. You can add a little bit of creativity to yourself, but there's models and systems, everything. And Josh is like a model savant. I mean, that guy's next level, right? How many units is he up to in terms of managing? Do you remember?
I think he said a little bit over 1,400.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, that's the number I tell people. So I'm glad it's right.
Yeah.
So, I think he owns 1,000, manages 1,400. He could have more, but he doesn't take on his property management contract gives him lots of leeway on what he's able to do to your property without your permission, which I love because I trust him completely. I want the hands-off approach, but other people want more involvement, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You're just not his client, right? So, what else did we learn from Josh?
I would have never thought owning a 250 plus door complex is easier than owning like a 10-door complex.
What makes it easier?
Everybody's in place to run it. So it's not you having to do it all or find the person to do it. There's on-site people who are running the 250 door or whatever it is plus,
So if I'm hearing from you, there's enough scale to afford leverage. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah, on-site leverage,
On-site.
right? That's interesting. What do you think? Do you think it's easier or harder to raise money for 250 doors versus 10 doors? Do you think easier? What makes you say that?
I think your net return, these people are actually going to turn profit much quicker than a 10 door. If you're trying to squeeze out 400 a door, you add all those extra numbers.
Potentially. I don't know it well enough to know if that's true or not. What other reasons? It could very well be true. What other reasons do you think 250 or 10 would be easier?
Well, I think a lot of investors are looking for the exit as well, so the exit on 250.
Yeah, you do get the advantage of like the extra zero on the deal, right? When I did Trump U back in the day, the instructor said, he's like, "Why are you guys playing in $100,000 deals? Why don't you go do $1 million deals?" And I'm like, $1 million deals? That's crazy. Because what, are you scared of zeros? Like, right now I am, yeah. But yeah, right. If you go up by 10% on something at $1 million, that's a lot higher return than at 100,000. I think big money and institutional money isn't interested in 10-unit deals, right? So if you're going to go raise money on like a 250 unit building and you're going to raise money, you get to get big chunks in that. It's a lot harder. You've got to go deal with, it's much like this, right? If you go to your aunt and uncle, they might give you money, but they are set up like this is what their money is personally. Whereas if you go to 250, you're dealing with people who are consistent investors. This is what they do. And your investor is almost like your client, is an additional consultant on your deal because they've done under deals like that, right? They're used to playing in that space on the consistent. So as long as you meet the metrics, hence what that guy's kind of talking about, as long as the deal meets the metrics, and they may see stuff in the gaps where your dad or your aunt or your cousin or your mom, they're like, "Hey, Johnny, I like you, so I'll give you the 20 grand," right? But they're not going to be that. That's like more of a favor friend type thing. They're not institutional money. But when you get up into that 250 range, you can go raise capital pretty quick because that's what there are. There's capital companies that literally just do that. Does that make sense? So I believe it's actually easier. It's got to be a deal though, because you're getting money from people who know what a deal is and people who don't, right? On a 10-unit deal, you get together a couple family members and you might have the money raised, and they have no idea. They're just doing it because you want to, right? Does that make sense? What else from Josh? What did you guys think about him buying houses on credit cards?
Well, when we haven't talked about that 25 years ago.
So what do you think about it?
You can, get advances, enough advances off enough credit card, just cash it works.
Yeah.
As long as you got a repayment plan.
It's funny hearing that story, him tell it, because that's when we first became friends, when he was doing that. And I remember I was at the bar with him and I'm like, "You're crazy." Like one of two things is good. I didn't know he had the previous debt situation when he was doing it. But when I was sitting there with him, I'm like, one of two things going to happen with this guy. Like when I was walking out of the bar, I was thinking this. I was like, he's either going to crush it or I'll never see him again. Right? Like one of those, that's the path, right? Because I mean, someone who's willing to take action like that is either going to do really well or like sprint off a cliff. It's one or the other. And for him, he just skyrocketed, right? And I think it goes to show you, like, if you're committed, you find a way, right? They say when the why is big enough, the how shows up. And I mean, that's that story in a nutshell, right? And he took big risk, and he's seeing big reward for it. And he didn't have much to lose. So I think there's something to be said for that, like taking big action like he did. Who was next? We had, what about Tony and Andrea Steffen? Who was there for that? Yeah, apartment buildings. They just closed on 150 unit. You see that? Yeah. 100 unit? Yeah. Yeah. Kudos to them. It's cool. I'm happy for him. You told me he rolls around in a lime green Lamborghini or something. What is it? Blue one? Fluorescent blue. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny. When he's coming. What ahas did we have from that class?
Systems in place for your turn.
System in place for the turn? Yeah. Yeah.
Look for opportunities where you can increase the NOI.
Yeah. So tell me more about that, because those two things kind of come together.
like, they were talking about if they found a multi-unit and it wasn't being ran very well, or maybe it hadn't been updated in quite a while, and they could come in and, pop some granite in and fix the management and get the systems in place, then the NOI would increase and therefore the valuation would increase.
Yeah. That's a cool thing when you deal in the commercial space, that you already know what your dollar, like if you were able to increase NOI by 100 grand and you're on an 8 cap, you just increased its value by 800,000. I mean, it's very, very math based, right? Which is really nice, because when you're in the residential space, you're making educated guesses. But really, just like we were talking about earlier, big money's just looking for that math, right? And there's investors are in different segments. Big money just typically wants to either find the operator that's going to do that and invest in them, or they just go buy the completed asset and make the return, right? And so there's opportunity in finding, distressed or mismanaged assets, and then improving them, just like there's money in buying distressed in properties, right? So like residential properties, and then fixing them up and selling them. And the nice thing on the commercial side is, like, you pretty much know what you're going to get back when you do it, right? So I definitely agree with that. There's actually, I screenshotted this. I left my phone in there, so I didn't get distracted by it. But someone talked about there's 4 points of leverage, and one of which is technology. And I was like, I'm 39, going on 40 this year. So like, the internet showed up when I was like in what, 4th grade, something like that, right? And so I wasn't on the internet my whole life, but basically I've grown up with it. But the generations ahead of me, Gen X and whatever's before that, they didn't grow up on the internet and grow up with the technology that we grew up with. So they have a lot of systems. Like, it would be tough for me today if the internet showed up today, that suddenly I become this tech person, right? But technology has brought so many efficiencies, back to Josh Sterling, right? Whereas a lot of these old timers are still doing math by hand and how they used to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just causes you to not make as much money. So if you can come in and bring today's technology, today's systems, today's operating to the plate, you'll be able to increase margins, increase clarity. That then, if you did want to exit that asset, you can make a fair amount of money doing that, right? So I think there's a big opportunity with that, and that's the relationship business. I know this. Like, Renee and I were across from Rochester High School the other day, picking up Shish Palace, because that's what we always order, is that Mediterranean. And that strip mall is kind of garbage. You guys been there recently? I mean, it's got really junky, which is really interesting, because they built like those nice, outbuildings up front, but the inside is like kind of crap. And I'm like, if I was a strip mall flipper, like, I would find the owner of this, because there's a lot of opportunity to improve this place. But I already have a job, and I don't want to be a strip mall flipper, right? And so I was like, this is a really good idea for someone, right? And if I knew someone who flipped strip malls, I'd call them and say, hey, like, we should buy this building and flip it, right? And find out what's going on with it. But those opportunities exist all over the place for you today. You're coming across them, right? You show up somewhere and it's a fleeting thought, but if you got intentional about it, you can monetize it, right? And so I'd encourage you to raise your awareness around that. We do have a good commercial department. I mean, if I was smart, I would call Brian and be like, hey, what's going on with this building? Like, we should go figure something out. Let's call the seller, right? But I didn't, because I'm ADHD, so my next thought popped in, because that one was gone, right? And now I'm here remembering it. But yeah, I think there's big opportunities with that. A system to that, if you're interested in a system, how I've been able to organize my crazy brain is I say, hey Siri, remind me, right? And that's how I log these thoughts that show up in my head and create a system around it. So great question. So what I started to do was say, hey Siri, remind me to check my reminders at 8 p.m. Yeah, for real. Yeah, I did, and I do, because otherwise it's, who knows what happens with me. What else do we learn from Tony and Andrea?
We're going back to Josh, and wasn't at Andrew's class, but Josh's guy's turn time's down. He was at 12 days to turn a unit. Now he's at 2.5 days.
What do you need to know in order to be able to articulate that? Like, what's the lead up to that you have to know? Because I think there's correlation to our realtor business or any business.
Plus the systems he's put in place, where once tax is completed, it automatically goes to the next person or the next step.
Yeah. Agreed. And you have to know your numbers, right?
Kind of like trucking logistics. You know, everything's gotta fall in line where it should.
Yeah. Thank God I married that. Yeah. I was never going to be that person, but she is. Um, yeah. Right. So you got to know your numbers. And then what does he get to do now? Now, the fact that he knows that, what does that then become? Yeah. Now he can sell it. Anthony, I don't know where he went. He was standing in the door, but we just picked up a client because he was articulating what our list of sale price is versus the market, right? Or I don't know if he got the actual listing, but the opportunity for the listing, right? Or maybe I think it was a listing. Well, the fact that he knew that gave us the opportunity to get to the table to where someone else who didn't necessarily know that number didn't necessarily get to the table, right? So when you know your numbers, you're able to value prop it, right? And that's the same thing if you go to raise money. If you have a track record of raising money and bringing returns to people, you learn this in KW Wealth, and I've learned this my whole life since starting investing. But raising money for the right deal is not the hard part. There's money everywhere. I mean, there's money everywhere, especially right now. I mean, there's endless amounts of money all over the place. The deal's the hard part. The deal is the hard part, right? So don't ever think a deal's too big, because I promise you, if I don't want to get involved, I know people who could, and so money's not the issue. What else do we learn from Tony and Andrea? I've got one, but I'm waiting to see if someone else says it. You remember when Tony talked about there's two different taxes, two different tax codes? What did he say? I thought this was a really good one. I'm going to R&D it and act like it's my own. You guys remember two different tax codes? He said there's tax codes for one group and there's tax codes for the other group. What were the two? We just got done talking about this, you and I.
People know what they're doing.
There's the educated and then the uneducated. And you guys have heard me say this before, but people think the tax code is an instruction manual on how to pay taxes. But in reality, the tax code is a few pages on how to pay taxes. The rest of it is how, if you don't want to pay taxes, these are the things you need to do, right? And that's what Tony was saying. When you're educated, you realize the impact of what these different things you can do within the tax code has on your taxes. Now, Renee and I haven't paid income tax in 3 years. And we made that like one of our big determining like focuses, is to make our life be in a way in which we wouldn't need to pay income tax, right? So we had almost all of our choices, or a large portion of our choices, aligned with, are we doing the things we need to do to reduce taxes to the lowest amount possible? Because taxes are always your highest expense of anyone, right? And so in the government, you could think of it as stick and carrot. The government has carrots here, and that's where they'll lower your taxes. And then they have sticks here, where you pay the most amount of tax, and that's when you're not doing what they want you to do. And so when you're educated, there's a million ways in which to keep your taxes as low as possible. I'll give you, and I believe if you understand this, you can add enough value to your database that they'll be here forever. Kristen just went on, what'd you just settle on for that list price if we were to list it today?
Which one?
Tony's.
9.
Okay, so 900 listing appointment. My chiropractor, I've been talking to him about all the properties he owns, doing cost segregation and bonus depreciation. And he goes, I just talked to my CPA about it, and he thinks I don't need to pay taxes for the next 10 years.
He sounds exactly like you. He was dancing around his kitchen telling his wife, we're never paying taxes again.
I mean, he gets a sermon every Monday when I show up on it, and he's finally taken action on it. So did he ever try to ask you to reduce your commission while you were there? No. That guy, in fact, we should charge him 10%, right? And we should charge him a lot more, because, I mean, literally he's going to save hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And here's one of the mistakes I made with Tony, because I think this is a good lesson when you're working on educating people, you know, that are in these two buckets. I never talked to him about even forming an S corp first. I'm talking to him about cost segregation and bonus depreciation, which I feel like is kind of up here in terms of like understanding. Step one was like, hey, are you formed as an S corp? And he's like, talk to my CPA. Like, I've overpaid on taxes for like $20,000 for the last like 5 or 6 years. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking to them about like level J stuff, and I didn't even hit A, B, and C with them, right? So just keep that in mind. There are things that you can add to business owners around the tax code when you understand it, like S corps, that can be super beneficial where they don't have to necessarily be a real estate professional. So if you're able to insert that value early, you get a captive audience there for the time being, or for an extended period of time. Does that make sense? Okay. What topics did you guys want to hit on after we recap that stuff? What's some burning questions that we could talk through? Yep, Chris.
In terms of,
This room's hot. We need a fan in here. I'm taking this off actually. I'm gonna keep the Kool-Aid shirt
I
going.
had listened yesterday from UVC. I was there for an hour. I didn't realize it till like.
Hopefully you wore deodorant.
What's that?
Hopefully you wore your
I took my
deodorant.
weekly shower.
That's good.
Right before, so.
Perfect.
Educating the client is great, but how do you find the resources, like the CPAs that know cross-seg and all that, or, it's.
Okay, so
how do you find
so
the team that you need?
team. Okay. What else do you guys want to hit on? Michael, come on. What do you got? Okay. What else? Short terms, long terms.
Where is the best free place to prospect your investor clients? Free places for investor clients. Not looking to do the paid ad spend.
Okay. What else? Yep.
What's the best thing you can do to differentiate yourself from a lot of investors are not loyal?
Okay. So UVP. If you were them, would you be loyal to us?
Loyal to the guy that brings me my numbers, or female, whoever brings me the numbers.
Guy is a general term. Like, let's just accept that. Yeah. I mean, in all candidness, like, you guys are part of these real estate Facebook groups. I mean, some of the dumbest things you can read on the internet are in those groups. I want to be loyal to us, right? So I think you have to add a lot of value up front, and I want to have the expectation of loyalty. If someone else brings them a great deal, why would you be upset about that? Like, I'd be happy for them.
Like loyalty, but like in terms of like being a go-to, kind of like, what, let me reach out to so and so.
Yeah, you want to be the Angie's List, which now is a different name. What did they change it to?
Just Angie.
Just Angie. Yeah. Yeah. So being the resource, right?
I think, you gain that if you've done deals with somebody or their family, then you're always the go-to that they ask first.
I'd agree with that. Okay.
Yeah, short-term rentals, is it really an investment or is it a business?
Okay. All right. Where do we want to start? Team, free places for leads, UVP, or STR?
Start at the top.
Building the team.
Okay. So, team. I think a great spot to start with this stuff, here's how I started, and is you go to the investor meetups and you see who else is there, right? Because the people who show up at the investor meetups are typically people who want to focus on investors. I know that's like obvious, but it's worth saying. So if you're there with a CPA or a CPA is at the investor meetup, he's probably pursuing investor clients, and he needs to do what? He needs to have a unique value proposition to acquire those clients that he has to move them from whoever they're working with to whatever they are. And I actually heard a money manager once called me, and he was prospecting me, and I'm like, oh, I already have somebody. And he goes, all of my clients worked with someone before they worked with me. What works better for you, Tuesday or Thursday? And I'm like, oh, this guy is good. And I was like, nah, I'm still not interested, but I like your line. Right. So you have to have a UVP to move people over. And if you go to the investor meetups, you'll see people who are pursuing that group of people. Usually they have a higher understanding in that demographic than the average person off the internet. Does that make sense? So I would start there. Now, you could show up and there's a big group of them that aren't great, right? So one of the things I've always done, so we've been fortunate enough to be in Gary's group for like 8 years now. So I always ask when I would get prospected consistently when we were first getting going, and someone tried to sell me a piece of technology or this or that, I'd always ask them, who do you work with that I would know that I could talk to about this? Because if I know that Ben Kenny is one of their clients, for instance, okay, now in my head that third party validation's through the roof, and I can call Ben and be like, hey, what's it like working with Bob, right? Well, if it's fantastic, I think the world of Ben, and I find Ben and Nick Waldner and go down the list of people, Sarah Reynolds, they're all working with this one CPA. Well, that's all I really need to know. And frankly, that's how I ended up at Keller Williams, right? I just saw top producer after top producer after top producer was at Keller, and I'm like, either they're dumb and I'm smart, right, or they're smart and I'm dumb, right? And so now I'm at Keller. It was a good move. So that's one way I would build my team. I would ask people who you respect, you like, and you trust who they're using in that space, and then go and use those people.
So who are you using?
On what? I can't stand our CPA. Yeah, he's and I don't have a great answer for you. I can send you someone who my buddy Dominic uses, who's out of Troy. He did our employee retention credit, and he was responsive and he was on it. I think Eric Germo uses him also, and I'm sure he's fine, and I'm sure he does a good job. So he's probably a good solution. Who did I just send him to? Someone on our team. Do you, Keith? Yeah. So find out from Keith, how he likes the guy, right? And he did a good job for the employee retention credit. But that's like Renee's world, and she's willing to tolerate more from these people than I will. But it's her space and her choice to make. So, yeah, if you guys have a great local CPA who's been fantastic, I'd love to bring him in the office as a resource for everyone and have him be one of our preferred vendors. I just have a real hard time because I think people's expectations of CPAs and what CPAs actually do aren't always the same thing. They want CPAs to be tax strategists. And the more complicated your taxes are, just the more work it is for them. And they usually they don't charge much more. So why would they want you to make your taxes more complicated? They just want to make sure you're doing things that don't increase your chances of being audited. These are compliance first people, right? So you have to go pursue that knowledge on your own and then bring it back to people. And I've talked to a lot of people in Keller because we're all looking for this tax strategist person. And the overwhelming conclusion is they don't exist. You got to go learn it. That's what KW Wealth provides, a great platform for that for next to nothing. And if you guys aren't a part of it, I mean, if you're here, you should be in it. Let's just say it that way. Okay. Do we want more tangible than that, or does that cover that? Yeah. And I go have coffees with them and sit down. I would, as you're building your team, make sure your team aligns around what your personal core values are, which would mean you need to be able to articulate what your personal core values are. Because if they're an extension of you and you're referring them to your database, they need to live the same mantra and ideas and perspectives that you do, right? And I'm pretty firm about that. If I see people on the internet making an ass of themselves consistently, and they're an extension of me, that's a problem. They could be fantastic, but that doesn't reflect great on me. Does that make sense? So, don't get me wrong, I've made an ass of myself on the internet before too, but at least I know it. Right. What other? Okay. Are we good on team, or we want to keep going on that? Okay. Does that make sense? Third party validation, find someone you respect, someone who reflects your core values, meet with them, create mutually agreed to expectations, and move forward, right? Free places for investors. So if you go on the, whether it's PRD or RPR or any of these sites where you can sort in a specific community, the ownership group, right? I used to do this early in our career, and I don't know the exact step-by-steps now, but you go in, and if you see one LLC owns 8 or 9 houses in that community, go on to Lara, pull their company docs, like do everything you can to try and figure out who the owner of that LLC is. And if you have a screaming hot deal in that market, you just found that investor, and I mean, overwhelmingly, they're going to say yes. And if they say no to a deal, they're probably looking to exit their portfolio. So you may pick up their listings, right? And so that's one way to do it. That's what I think the easiest way to do it. back in the day Craigslist, but I mean, I don't even know, does Craigslist still exist?
As I've used it in a long time.
Yeah. And for $2 a lead, honestly, this is so much easier. It's just so much easier.
FYI, when you're
Yeah.
using the corporation lookup site,
Yeah.
if it's something that's, the last several years, everybody files electronically, and so you never find phone numbers. But if it's somebody that's got a lot of filings that go way back, dig the old ones up because they're handwritten, they usually have their phone number on
Oh,
them.
that's good advice right there. Yeah, you can always mail them. I have a deal. Call me, right? That costs money, but usually you'll get a response on that.
What we've been doing too, like you've been talking about in the team, is when you're working with your buyer or seller clients, always just have that conversation with them about, if not now, long term, like would they be potentially interested in investing in real estate? And as you go through that process, you start making your lists of what people are looking to invest in, and then as you're prospecting, if you find stuff, you just put those batch emails out once a week. And like Joe said, though, if it's a good deal and they run numbers, they'll probably just call you off that email.
Yeah, my ancillary motive on that is I think that group will be more apprehensive to own real estate, but will be have a higher likelihood to give me money. So if I ever come across a deal where I need money, that's the first list I'd go to, right? Because I think there's a lot of people who'd be willing to loan money on a deal who don't want to necessarily do the work or own it themselves. Doctors are a classic example of private money, right? That sort of thing. And usually you can get that private money from that group for cheaper than what you would get it institutionally, right? And so when you ask that question, you're building that list, and you may not need that money today, but should the strip mall across the street from the high school come up for sale, maybe that would be a good list to start with to start raising some money from, right? And so that's always my thought, and that's always been my thought over time. We just haven't done a great job of like actually tagging those, but I think moving forward we should do a better job of it, because I think you'd be shocked. I was at a birthday party with for Lewis, and I was talking with this guy. Found out his name's Gaurav. I was talking with Gaurav, and he is head of cybersecurity at General Motors. And so I asked Gaurav, I'm like, well, like when you say you're head of cybersecurity at General Motors, like how many people roll up to you, right? These are the fun conversations I have at birthday parties. And he goes, oh, it varies, but somewhere between 250, 275. I'm like, okay, Gaurav's doing good. Gaurav then told me he's looking at $2 million houses, and I was like, oh, that's good too. And he lives in our neighborhood right now, which is not $2 million houses. And he's like, Joe, 2 years ago at the HOA party, I told you I had $300,000 that I want you to do something with. And I'm like, oh yeah, Garth, you did tell me that, didn't you? Right. And so my point behind that is he didn't say, hey Joe, I want to buy real estate. He said, Joe, I want to give you this money that we can make some money together. I know you're in real estate. Right. And so there's a lot of people that are like Garth that want to do something like that are highly successful, and they're more than willing to write you the check to go do the work. And I think you can come across those people a lot more often and a lot easier than you think you can, because they're everywhere. They would love to make more of a return than the stock market. Did he?
Like his friends, pilot friends.
Yeah, if they're in private aviation, they have money, right? And yeah, pilots make great money. They're busy being pilots, but they have money off to the side. Doctors, I mean, go down the list. That's a great private money list. I'm not surprised Josh said that. That makes sense. Chris.
Yes, I don't know if there's, I think it's free. I use prop trading before, but like you use go out, find high net worth houses, paid off, high equity, kind of
Sure.
target those people.
Yeah.
With no loans.
I think that's a good way. Yeah, high equity list is probably a good list. High net worth, right? Those sort of things. Okay, so that's team, free places for investors. UVP. I think track record really helps. I think attaching to something that has a track record really helps, because you're using that third-party validation. Like a brand new agent that joins Fire Team, they're able to use all the leverage of Fire Team success working with investors, right? They might not have the personal success, but they're able to point to the group. I think people in our brokerage can do the same thing in terms of production and market share and those sort of things on a listing appointment. But I think ultimately the UVP is the deal, right? The deal itself is the value prop, and bringing that to the table, which means you have to go and have a deal that is unique and is a value. Um, Now you can go and add all these educational pieces to the table that we've just got done talking about, but at the end of the day, it's the deal. And if you bring deals, look at the commercial agents. I don't know how much you guys do with commercial agents. They don't do anything. I mean, literally like nothing for their clients. I mean, it's like disgusting. Um, Maybe they're the smart ones. Um, and they don't do anything, but they have the deal, right? So the fact that they have the deal, Brian told me on a $5 million, him and Justin Zeal are doing the $5 million gas deal, and the buyer is paying two agents. Well, there's three agents on the buy side, each are earning $100,000, and there's three agents on the sell side, each are earning $100,000, and the buyer is paying personally two of the agents $100,000 each, and the seller is paying one of the agents $100,000 on the buy side. And I'm like, well, why are they paying $600,000 in commission? That's crazy. He goes, because we have the deal, right? And I'm like, okay. So the UVP on that deal is that they have the deal. They have a gas station that has a liquor license in a premier location, and there's just not much of those out there, and people are willing to pay for it, right? So the UVP, I would say more than anything, is the deal. And you can add the educational pieces to add additional leads to come into your funnel or have them talk to you longer, but you got to bring the deal. That's my 2 cents on that. Anyone else have anything to add to that they found works working with investors from a UVP perspective? In-house management, I know Trish does some of that. I personally hate the property management business, so I'm probably the wrong person to talk to, but talk to her. I'd rather hire it. Did I tell you? Did I tell you that our seller didn't want one of the agents in the office? The seller didn't want an ADA dog, so now the Section 8 renter wants us to write her a check for $10,000 for discrimination. So I told Kevin, send her back. No. Yeah, fascinating stuff.
You watch, the whole service dog issue. Oh my gosh, when you get those, and then some of them are real, the emotional support animals, and then some of them have, they paid for a letter to be written.
Well, the state didn't even verify if it is, but the state sent us saying the client's willing to settle for 10 grand. I'm like, why is the state facilitating the shakedown? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
I mean, if there's a real prescription and a real doctor's script, give it to me.
Yeah.
So I can comply.
Yeah. Well, we're not even the ones that said no. The seller said no. Sue the seller, or the landlord, right? So, yeah. Short-term rentals. I think short-term rentals, and I get this question a lot because of what Renee's done with it. I'm just like the in-house box burner. I just burn boxes. That's my role in the whole thing, and I throw away plastic. You'd be shit. You'd be. Oh, I did stuff a lot of pillows and pillowcases, endless amounts. Yeah, it's a business. It's a full-fledged business, and I think what people perceive short-term rentals to be versus what it actually is it's a lot more work than you think. Short-term rentals, and they also today are under an incredible amount of pressure. You really have to have that UVP. I'll give you a small example. So our property on Baker, I think did you stay at that one? No, you didn't. You stayed at Northwest Branch. Northwest Branch is a UVP. Northwest Branch has a cool game room off of it. It's got a walkout basement. It can house like 14 people. It's on 2.5 lots. There's a lot of like unique, amazing things about that property that that property was booked a year in advance, right? And because there just aren't a lot of properties that house 14 people, are beautiful like that one is, have the now, I don't know, I'm not going to overquote it. Let's just say 55-star reviews behind it. That property is super unique and is in massive demand. Regular Baker that we own is a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. It's beautiful, but do you know how many 3-bedroom, 1-baths are available up north in the state of Michigan? There's like nothing other than its beauty. And when I say beauty, I just mean the way Renee designed it. There's nothing outside of that that's unique about that property in any way whatsoever, right? It can't house a lot of people, doesn't have a game room, Like it doesn't have these things. The property itself is awesome. It's a great property. It just has nothing unique about it. In Airbnbs, people sign up for them, or Airbnb. I don't want to call it Airbnb. It's like calling it Kleenex when it's tissue. Short-term rentals. It's all about the experience, right? And people don't realize they go and try and set it up like, oh, well, if someone was to live here, they're not living there. They're experiencing that for a window of time. And so it needs to be an experience. It needs to be unique, which is part of the experience thing.
Thematic, if
What's
possible.
what?
Thematic, like try to have
That's a big word. Break it down for a 2-2 at Central.
a dearth of knowledge for Ryan over there. But anyway,
Dearth.
theme, yeah. So when we went
You're
to,
over here with a
we went with a
thesaurus.
group of like 6 to 8 people down to Detroit, got a little party bus, went to a concert, and then we stayed at this home that had a split. But it was called the Peacock Room. And it was kind of designed like you were almost like in a rainforest. They actually had a paper mache peacock on a wall. They had a really cool study area you can go sit in and read that had really old historical books from King's Books in Detroit, authentic to the area. So the more that it's thematic too is going to draw that unique, because they even have a filter on
Thematic. I got you now.
unique experiences.
Yeah.
That
I agree with
filter
that.
out. Like we went to Colorado, I stayed in that corn silo that was converted into a 1-bedroom condo, and it was the coolest experience ever.
You never told me that. I'm not surprised though. You want people to walk in and be like, "This is cool," right? Like you want that, not like, "Oh, I could see myself living here." That's not the same thing, right?
We have a concrete guy who's done some driveways for us, and him and his wife bought an old bank building in Detroit, and they turned the giant vault into the bedroom, so you can go sleep in the vault.
A little claustrophobia sometimes, right? That's how you see the Liberty Title in Ann Arbor, old bank. One of the closing rooms is the vault.
Oh, your credit card didn't process? Close the vault.
Yeah.
That's funny.
We have one though, like an arbitrage one where somebody rents our house for $2,600 over by 13 at Woodward, and then they use it as an Airbnb. So in other words, they didn't have to go buy a house, spend the money to buy it. They rented it from me.
Yeah,
And
Jessica
then
Caldwell
they
does that.
Airbnb it.
Yeah, I wonder if she's still doing it. I haven't talked to her lately about it. Yeah, arbitrage is interesting. As a landlord, I mean, it's a fair amount of wear and tear on the property. So get a premium. And they might be willing to pay it. So.
Of course, that's a lot of things. If you buy a hospital or like Children's Hospital, where people have to come and stay a while, is another option too.
Yeah, so you're talking about midterms. And we were big fans of midterms. That Northwest branch that that you guys stayed at, we got $5,000 a month this winter for that. On someone who was up there working on the dam, a bunch of people that worked on the dam stayed in the property, and we got $5,000 a month for it. I mean, what a blessing. I mean, that usually rented like 1 week in January, 1 week in February, maybe a couple weeks in December. So to have that locked up, and actually he moved over to one of our new ones because that got booked for the summer. So he moved over to Pinelands, and part of the reason we're having a hard time booking Pinelands is we don't have any reviews because he's been in there for the last 2 months, right? And so now summer season's here, and he's been there for 2 months, but we don't mind the money in the short term. So it's been a little. We've had to put more advertising dollars around getting it booked. So a couple things on short terms to keep in mind. Like you literally have to think about, oh, it needs forks, right? Oh, we need this toilet paper. And how do you create all these automations around it? It's like property management on steroids because you have it's like a cross between property management and a hotel, right? And you've got to.
You have an inventory when you go there, and you have to cross off it, all these forks and spoons and glasses.
Yeah, so you got to have a launch list, right, and make sure all this stuff shows up. When I say I'm a professional box burner, it's because I mean literally the post office in Gladwin's like, oh, you're the short term, you're the Airbnb people, right? Because they're literally, I mean, mountains of boxes when we would show up there, and Lewis and I would tear them apart and pull everything on plastic and burn it and trash it and the whole bit, right? Borrow the entire street's trash cans, stuffing them when our friends weren't up there. Yeah, so it's a lot of work. Understand that you need something that's unique. It needs to be an experience. It's so much work that, like Trish, for like a long-term rental, what do you typically charge in terms of like cost? Like what's your fee structure long-term? Like if I said come manage, property management. What do you
I
charge?
always say it's 7 to 10% of the collected rent,
Yeah.
But it depends on how much the rent is. So cheap stuff under 1,400 is going to be 10%.
Yeah.
If your rent's in the 2,500, now maybe it's going to be 7%. And
Yeah.
if you give me multiple units, you're going to get a discount.
Yeah. And short-term rental is 25 to 35%. Right. So just as a reflection, if you were to go third party on that, 25 to 35% is what short-term rental companies charge.
You
Go ahead.
guys are self-managed, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of your automation systems look like? Considering you guys are what, 3 hours away or 2 hours
A
away?
little over 2. Again, you got to find a great team. Your cleaner is going to be one of the most important people. Ours is batshit crazy, so now we have 2 backups. And she couldn't handle the amount of like turns we have, so you got to have backups on that. So we have 3 cleaners up there. So you got to establish your team. Your contractor is going to be your right hand, just like when you establish a local team. Chad up there, I'm not sure we would have taken on these other 2 if we didn't have Chad. He was slow to the game a little bit, but we trust him completely. He popped furnace, dishwasher wasn't working. He popped by it and figured out what was going on, right? So you got to have that local team on the ground. What was your question?
Well, what's some of your like automation
Oh,
systems?
yeah, so find the team because they're going to be who you rely on when you're at distance. There's a proper software called OwnerRes. OwnerRes syncs all of the booking sites together to one and then pushes back out, right? So no different when you book an appointment on Follow Up Boss, it shows up on Google Calendar. When they book something on Booking.com or on Airbnb or on VBRO, it pulls that all together. And it also, I believe, centralizes all of the communication. So that helps a lot. I'm sure it does more than even what we use it for. But really, OwnerRes is like one of the big things to it. Renee could get into a lot of the other like specifics on it. I know we use a specific group of locks that we can adjust from afar, and then change the codes on a consistent basis. There's Wi-Fi controlled internet, or I'm sorry, Wi-Fi controlled thermostat, so you can increase and decrease based on, especially in the fall and winter months. You don't want to keep that property at 70 all winter. So when we don't have a guest, we bring it down to like 55, and then before they show up, you raise it. But those are all things that you need to do in the short-term space that you don't need to do in the long-term space. So it's much more active income than what long-term is, but it's also much more income. So it just kind of determined based on what your goals are. But we're up to 4 of them now.
Are your
And
cleaners acting as like inspectors a little bit too, letting you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
"Hey, this is broken,
Absolutely.
missing," and all that
Yeah.
good stuff?
And she's like super dramatic about it. Like, they were smoking pot in the garage. It's like, oh, people are gonna do that. You know what I mean? She's going crazy about it, or this broke or that broke. And it's like we realize, there's certain things that are cost of doing business. Like one of the cabinet doors broke. Okay, it's $200. You fix it. You can get. I see this on the short-term rental sites. These people get overly dramatic about these things. They scratched the stove, and they're like in this like mental terror as a result of it. And it's just like, well, it is what it is, when you expect it and don't attach all that emotion to it, and realize that it's just a business, because you can go after these people. We had someone take a pool stick to the TVs. Some domestic took place, and I don't even know everything. It broke lamps and TVs and all this stuff. And the wife was super apologetic about it. It was about $1,000 worth of damages. It sucked. We had to go over there and turn some stuff and fix it, replace the TVs. And she's like, "Hey, can you have mercy on me?" She sent us a $600 check, so we had to eat the 400. But life goes on. I mean, someone else would have handled that in a highly emotional way, and that might have taken them out of the short-term game. And that's what our cleaner found. Multiple people on our lake couldn't handle stuff like that happening to their house, and they sold. So understand that too. Like, treat it like a business. Don't get overly attached to the fact that a piece of equipment like a TV broke. Just buy a new TV. It's not that expensive, right? And if you can get money out of them, great.
That touches into the one thing you told us too, when you're going to go into, especially if you're doing it yourself, getting into the game, like there is a lot of upfront costs with that.
Yeah.
STRs, like
Yeah.
a significant amount, but then you said there's much more active income that follows.
Yeah, we're into each of them at about 100,000 in cash. So when you're launching 2 at a time, you got 100 grand out and you got no income coming in, right? And you're making pity payments on those, right? So yeah, you got to have a bankroll for it. You could put it all on a credit line, but then you're moving backwards in terms of cash flow that then you got to go make up, right? So just understand it's very cash intensive. It's very work intensive, very work intensive. But you can make great money. I mean, we're renting those properties out for $650 a night, right? And we have minimum a week, right? So our Northwest branch is getting $750 a night because we have enough track record, and we felt like we were underpriced. We wouldn't have booked a year in advance if we were priced right. You know what I mean? We could have probably got $850 a night, and maybe had a couple vacancies this summer, but they would have booked as we got closer. Where it was completely booked before the summer was over last year. So that means you were underpriced if that's happening, right? So, all right, what time do we have? I don't want to run over.
59.
What?
59.
Any final things that we want to touch on in the last minute we have here? Go ahead.
What is your return of investment expectation on short term or midterm?
Return on investment. I don't know if I can give you those numbers offhand. What I will tell you is after all expected costs on a long-term rental, I don't want to make less than $300 a month. So that's after anticipating 1 month's vacancy, after anticipating 1 month's maintenance. I don't work much off percentages. I want the spread on it. The percentage aspect. The truth is the properties you're buying are all roughly in the same price range. You're not buying, because the math doesn't work if you're buying a $400,000 house trying to do a long-term rental on it, right? You're not going to hit the $300 spread. So you're dealing with houses that are 80 to 100. And honestly, today you won't find a $300 spread after everything I want to build into anticipated expenses. They just don't exist. Joe Hamill's willing to do 200, right? He just wants a spread on pity to rent of being $200 a month. That doesn't make me right and him wrong. It's just what his personal math is, right? And he self-manages within that. But he's screaming for scale. He wants a lot of them because he understands hard assets appreciate, right? Midterm rentals, I can't. I mean, we just fell into that. I can't really quote that for you. But long terms, we want our money back in 2 years. Not down payment, just what we put into it. We want it back in 2 years. That's usually what we're targeting. So I don't know, what does that mean? 50% return on the year. We want the money back in 2 years, but that's with self-management, right? So if you go third-party management on short-term rentals, you won't cash flow. You just won't. But you might be okay with that, depending on what your goals are. I want to recommend it, but some other people do it. All right. With third-party short-term rentals that buy them today at 8% interest rates. Oh, long-term, sure, yeah. But they're buying them today at 8% interest rates and cash flowing.
Yeah, we've run into a lot of people recently that bought 3-4 years ago.
Right.
They
Okay.
had a good rate,
Yeah.
and even with our management fee and everything, they're still going to pull 600 to 800.
Yeah, that of course. But if you're buying the $150,000 property today, putting 25% down at an 8% rate, you're not going to make the spread on what rent is, which you might not care. You might be okay going backwards and rent or interest rates. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I agree. Any other final question?
So, Joe,
Go ahead.
I'm running into a lot of investors here locally, out of state, foreigners that are financing, they're looking for lenders. And I want to be more selective and spending a lot of time with these people. I just wonder what's the most effective way to deal with these prospects that might just drop off. They do the initial bigger pockets or whatever the leads from, and then they just don't follow up. But more importantly is, it's hard for me to get involved with anybody that's really into finance at this point.
What makes it hard for you to get involved with them?
Well, I'm fairly new and I'm very selective, and I'm spending months. I just started, but I'm just spending a lot of time working with people that are really not cooperating as much as I would want.
I think if you had the deal, they would.
Well,
Have you sent them an
I
actual?
had one, I thought, well, it could still happen, but he's looking for a 10 to 12% return.
Cash on cash or
Yeah.
just
Not-
cap rate?
so,
Cash on cash. Okay.
And it's just not, to me, I could work with somebody, the same week, and they love the deal, and they love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you should have any loyalty to that person, and I don't think they should have any loyalty to you. Right? I think either the math meets what they want or it doesn't. And what you'll find is you get less calls when you put your math really high, because they'll just go to someone who's willing to take more deals. I mean, we all will, because that increases our return on time, right? So I would find a different investor. And I do think people can. I wouldn't be afraid of people who need to finance.
I'm not afraid of it, but the numbers are so different.
The investor world is going to be tons of tire kickers, and sorting through who the tire kickers are is really the biggest challenge outside of having the actual deal, right? But I think you really got to define people's buy box right up front, and when you come across a deal, you've got it categorized in your CRM as to is willing to do what and for how much, and then you just mass blast that list and first come first serve. That would be how I would personally set it up. I don't know if that helps at all, but okay. All right. Appreciate you guys.
Thank
Yep.
you.